Ross.
You're looking pretty perky,
I think
Ross.
he's in the last line. I think I got to go watch the last line.
What is it?
What?
It's about the pioneers. He's really just one sec.
You just think it's the last line.
No.
What? Oh, for God's sake.
All right, it's not actually done.
No, it's not.
I give up.
He's still going.
He's still going. Let's just go.
From New York Times Opinion, I'm Michelle Cotton.
I'm Ross Douthat.
I'm Carlos Lozada.
And this is Matter of Opinion. It's officially Friday. We are recording after midnight on the closing night of the Republican convention, where Trump's acceptance of the nomination speech is still going and going and going. So let's just hop right in as he, at some point, presumably wraps this up. What are you guys feeling about this? Thoughts, feelings, compliments, complaints? Talk to me.
It was a rally speech. It didn't feel like a convention speech. It felt like he continued the rally he didn't get to finish on Saturday.
I mean, this has been a long week. It's been a long week, guys, hasn't it? I mean, it's a lot to process. I mean, Donald Trump describing surviving an assassination attempt, hugging the fireman's uniform of the man
There was
killed,
a kiss. Kissing the helmet.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was, as we say now in the business, tremendous content for the first 25 minutes. And also, one of the things that was promised was a different Trump, right? A Trump sort of humbled and transformed, like Tony Soprano in the final season of The Sopranos. Like a man who'd had a brush with death, right? And honestly, it did. I thought the early part did seem sort of like a somewhat different Trump, and then Carlos is right; it became a rally speech. And people will often say, like, "Oh, you people in the media, you don't listen. You've got to listen to the whole Trump rally speech because he says so many weird and crazy things and so on." And now the whole country has gotten to listen to the entirety of a Trump rally speech. There was a Hannibal Lecter riff. I mean, it was all there.
Well, he was looking extremely kind of thoughtful and low-key and somber and sedate as he started off, and he told the story of his near-death experience, and he talked about how it was basically God was on his side. It was a providential moment. It had vaguely messianic overtones to it. And then it was only really when he kind of got past that part that he got that twinkle back in his eye, and as he kind of dug into the American carnage, this is everything that the Democrats have done to ruin this nation, that he kind of woke up and kind of got his mojo back.
I mean, but the audience was riveted by the opening part and got bored pretty quick in the incredibly long rest of the speech. I don't think he was playing to the crowd. I think he was sort of, he likes giving rally speeches. I mean, I mean this sincerely. He has been through a trauma, right? Like, I don't think it's remotely surprising that he would be, handed a script and send out on stage after this trauma, that he would be inclined to just sort of wander back into the role that he enjoys most, which is riffing. There's a lot of riffs.
But what's interesting is that this makes me think about what the purpose of a convention speech is, right? Often it comes, especially if you're not the incumbent, right? It comes after a bruising primary battle. You're trying to make a case for party unity. None of those things were relevant here. So I'm trying to figure out, like, what, it sounds like we're not super satisfied with this speech, but I'm trying to think of, like, what was he trying to accomplish in this speech? What did he need to accomplish in this speech that he hadn't already accomplished?
I mean, he didn't really need to accomplish anything, right? I mean, that's part of it. He could do what he wanted to. He's feeling strong, understandably. He did hit on what I think is going to be a huge theme going forward, which is the idea of chosen one, man of destiny, which we saw in some of the earlier speeches. That kind of theme, I think, we're going to be hearing, just ad nauseum between now and November.
A lot of divine intervention in the campaign in recent days, right? Biden saying he might consider stepping down from the campaign if the Almighty came down and told him to do so. No, I'm not making a funny. Like I'm pointing out that, both campaigns are talking about the power of the divine in guiding them forward.
You know that I believe in the power of the divine, Carlos. I'm laughing as one does at God's mysterious purposes
and political preferences in the 24 campaign. Totally.
Well, Trump did say he knew that he had God on his side, although presumably he was referring to in saving him from an assassin's bullet as opposed to winning him an election. But who's to say? I want to ask what was notably not in this speech, although it feels like everything conceivably possible was jammed into this speech. But does anybody else want to, try to put a headline on this or impose a framework? Or is that just madness?
I don't think you can impose a framework on a Trump rally speech. He played the hits, right? Wrapped in remarkable new material related to his assassination with some sort of scripted appeals to unity that probably would have been more notable had he not riffed and played all the hits, right? I mean, I think the question is more like Carlos was asking, right? What are convention speeches for? And I mean, this was not a speech that seemed set up to sort of persuade wavering Americans to vote for Donald Trump. I think if you listen to J.D. Vance's vice presidential speech last night, I guess technically 2 days ago by the clock,
right? Yes. By the calendar.
It was a more conventional, let me introduce myself to you. Here's my biography. Here are some critiques of the opposition party. Here is a very sort of general, framework of where a populist Republican Party stands. Like, you can sort of analyze that speech in terms of what does it work or not in terms of who it's appealing to. I mean, Trump was just himself, right? And so I guess I think there are probably a number of liberals and Democrats who I see them in my social media feed right now, who have had a very rough few weeks and who listened to the incredibly lengthy, tedious parts of that speech and thought to themselves, well, hey, we can still beat this guy, right? I think that's going to be a common partisan reaction to the second 2/3 of this speech from liberals as we enter a moment when quite possibly the Democratic Party is replacing its nominee. Did you guys, as liberals or sensible centrists or whatever you guys are, did you have that reaction?
So I because one is not enough, I spent the day watching the prior two acceptance speeches that Trump gave.
Oh, dear God.
And hey,
why didn't you read a book?
I do the work, baby.
Read a book.
No.
I do the work.
That's just
okay?
masochistic.
But what was interesting, so the first one was very kind of brash and kind of angry and braggy and sort of the Trumpiest that you could imagine, right? I'm the law and order candidate. I am your voice. I alone can fix it. Hillary's corrupt, committed all these crimes, right?
There's a lot of that in this one.
But yeah, and then the second one was more subdued. The 2020 one's more subdued, his demeanor, but it was darker. There were a lot of criticisms of Joe Biden, but also the Democrats are the party of, anarchists and agitators and looters and flag burners, and Biden's a Trojan horse for socialism and the right, and the like. I mean, not and the right, excuse me. But he also ended with a lot of, it felt like just a very comfortable retelling of the American story from westward expansion to space travel, right? And tonight felt like a mushing of those two experiences.
So much mushing.
It just felt like he had jammed together the prior two speeches and just added the incredibly, I agree with Ross, just sort of very riveting story of surviving the shooting. And if we go by the conventional wisdom that most people don't watch more than the first 20 minutes, then, they sort of walk away with, something that, people were hanging on his every word if you just looked at the crowd. It was very quiet when he was telling the story.
That's a great story.
And that's what people wanted to hear, But if you hung on, then you really just got
I'm just bitter that we didn't call it quits after the first 20 minutes and just go from there. But let's take a quick break and talk about another speech that caught our attention. We'll be right back. All right, so we've talked about the big speech. Let's talk about the other top news of the convention, Trump's vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance. And Ross, I want to get your reaction to this first, since you've recently interviewed Vance. So how are you feeling about him, just from his short moment in the spotlight?
Well, as I said, I think that given the contrast with Trump's speech, Trump's speech made Vance's speech feel like a masterpiece of concision, a Gettysburg Address for our times.
Which it did not feel like at the time when we listened to it. It didn't
feel like that at the time. No, I would have said, I thought that it felt at the time like a very sort of cautious, somewhat, negotiated speech by a candidate with his own strong ideas, but who is very much obviously sort of in the shadow of the Trump phenomenon, and to me, it had a lot of effective vignettes and moments that were not fully woven together into a kind of rhetorical whole, but it also reflected, this sort of what I think is going to be a persistent dynamic if the Trump-Vance ticket is elected over the next 4 years, where Vance is going to be sort of this symbol of a very specific idea of what the Republican Party is and where it's supposed to be going, but who is sort of occupying that role while also being just the number two to Donald Trump, right? And sort of negotiating those two roles is pretty challenging. And I think you saw some of the challenge of that in the speech, right? It was sort of, it included a bunch of a couple of lines about like how great it was that the Republican Party has a lot of differences of opinion, which is, again, not sort of something you often see in convention speeches, but was sort of a nod to this weird sort of sense of sort of contestation and flux around what the Republican Party is going to stand for after Trump. So it was very interesting in that regard. But not, I thought, a kind of like sort of humdinger of an introduction to the vice president.
But that's good, though. You don't, as the vice president, especially a vice president for this nominee, you don't want to be a humdinger. You don't want to sizzle. You don't want to sparkle too much, or you will get slapped down because you cannot outshine Trump. That would be terrible. That said, I do think since I've kind of followed him on the campaign trail, Vance has upped his speaking game, is more polished. Now, maybe that's not a good thing in
you
this
guys are
political
talking like
climate.
Political strategists, like his tone and his polish, like.
Well, how are you supposed to talk about a speech? The content? I don't want to talk about the content.
The substance of the speech.
At home? Okay, well,
forget the people at home. This is us
man.
talking. Like the substance of the speech, I thought was really interesting. Like
the substance of the speech was great economic populism, and his biographical bits were genius.
Not that stuff. Not that stuff. Well, first of all, I agree with you, Michelle, that it's rarely the president's nominee speech that matters in the conventions, right? Like if you think about the convention speeches people remember, right? It's like Obama in 2004. It's Pat Buchanan in 1992. With like the
or
culture.
Bill Clinton's terrible
speech.
It's back in the day.
It's Cuomo in 84.
Sarah Palin.
It's
Sarah Palin gave quite a speech.
Palin in 08, Cuomo in 84. Like it's always someone else, right? But I thought there was a lot of meat on the Vance. First of all, he's obviously supposed to be like Mr. Outreach to the heart. Like how many times can you mention Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania? Like in a speech that was kind of remarkable.
I wanted more about his mama, though. I'm not gonna lie.
But
I'm just saying.
I'll tell you more about his mama. Like the fascinating thing about J.D. Vance to me, in part, is that there's no J.D. Vance nomination without hillbilly elegy, right? And yet, in this campaign, I think, and in this speech, I felt like he rejected a lot of the premises of that book. But in part was that Mema, that the adorable homespun wisdom of Mema. At one point in the book, she tells him, like, don't be like those fucking losers who are always blaming someone else for their problems, right? And yet in his speech, he's giving, his people a lot of people to blame. But the thing that I found most fascinating about his speech is how he explicitly downplayed the notion of America as an idea and instead focused on America as a homeland, right? He said, the idea of America as sort of this last best hope on earth is the notion of America as an idea. But he referred to Trump as the last best hope. So I think this is a really interesting way, a shift in the way our leaders talk about America and talk about themselves. That line, last best hope, is from Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War, just before the Emancipation Proclamation. And he's talking about the idea of America as a place of freedom, right? Not a single person or a single leader. Elevating a leader over a principle is a really good way to kill off the American idea. So I found that to be an amazing moment that did not get a lot of attention in the Vance speech. And I'm eager to see if this is something that gets sort of further developed in a potential Vance vice presidency.
So I was struck by the line that Vance had when he was talking about won't fight for an abstraction, but will fight for their home. I actually think this is a huge difference between the Republican and Democratic Party, or at least how they talk to their people. Democrats tend to be very high-minded about saving democracy and, preserving this, that, or the other. And Republicans are really more kind of getting in the gut level, and you have to get out there and fight because they are ruining your community, your home, your family, that sort of thing. So it actually struck me as something that is very much a part of our current political discourse and that I think resonates with an awful lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I agree with Vance that America is, well, I mean, I would say America is both an idea and a people.
There's a unity. There's a unity position.
Some unity, but I thought the graveyard. I mean, he talked about the graveyard where 7 generations of his family are buried. I thought that was very effective, and speaking as someone who has had a lot of generations of my family in America, it resonated personally with me, and I don't really. Since Carlos just chided us for acting like political strategists, so I won't act like a political strategist, and I will say that it resonated with me, and that's all I'll say.
I like that.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. So a lot of the convention, obviously, and a lot of the speeches were quickly rejiggered to incorporate the whole drama of the assassination attempt. I don't think the convention is going to be the end of this. I think that this is going to reflect on not just the stories that Trump tells on the campaign trail, but just kind of also how other people are talking about Trump. And specifically, I think, one, this confirms a lot of conservatives' kind of worst fears that their hero really is kind of a target for evil forces. But more to the point...
And chosen by God. Right? Those go together, yeah.
More to the point, he is a man of destiny. He is not just a regular politician. He is not just a candidate. He is not just whatever. He is special. And I think that is going to be something we just hear indefinitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wrote a column, since you keep saying man of destiny, I wrote a column about Trump as a man of destiny. And I felt like the assassination sort of attempt, not the attempt per se, but just the extraordinary sequence of him literally surviving by an inch and a turn of his head, followed by the sort of remarkable images that were taken as he sort of rose from the scrum of Secret Service agents. I was laughing earlier about the designs of the Almighty, but I do think Trump is a man of destiny. I think he has to be understood that way, which is not the same as saying that, God has anointed him as the savior of America and everyone should vote for him. I think these are two actually different things. They may overlap. A man of destiny could be someone you should vote for. It could be someone who's, profoundly dangerous, a challenge to everything you hold dear, and you need to find the right way to resist him. But in either case, it means sort of accepting that the Trump phenomenon is just something sort of extraordinary, outside the norms that govern, partisan politics as usual, and that the figure of Trump is like this weird sort of magnetic force around which other things orbit. And you have to approach politics like that in this era.
Well, interestingly, Ross, I think you have hit upon the unity message there. I think whether or not you like Trump or dislike Trump, you kind of, at this point, have to acknowledge that his movement is different and he is not a normal anything.
Well, yeah, but he's also, the other thing that's happening while the assassination convention, everything else is happening, right, is that the Democrats are trying to get rid of their nominee and replace their nominee, right? And that is, I think, actually sort of a response that's commensurate to what Trump represents, right? It's like, yes, this is a context in which it would make sense that the other political party dealing with all the strangeness, the strange cosmic energy working around Trump would be itself trying to do sort of extraordinary things in response. I don't know. It's felt like a very sort of cosmic few weeks.
Well, yeah. To be fair, the response, the strange things they're responding to are what appears to be a kind of meltdown in their own candidate as opposed to anything happening with the other candidate. But if we're looking at divine intervention or cosmic forces, who's to say what caused the meltdown in their candidate?
It was a response. It was a response on the Democrats that was underway before the assassination attempt. I think they'll be sort of conflated historically, right? That like shortly after, if Biden indeed, ends his campaign, people remember it happening sort of shortly after the assassination attempt. But I've been trying to think about how significant this thing might be, the assassination attempt might be, when we sort of tell the story and write the books about this election, right? Like in the moment right now, it feels overpowering.
That picture's going to live forever.
Oh,
Carlos.
Of course it will.
That picture is going to be in coffee table books for decades.
And not just the picture, the words he chose to utter. They were not like, I'm fine, everyone. It was like fight, which is the defining sort of ethos of the Trump movement. But do you remember? It's a different thing, right? But do you remember the Access Hollywood moment in 2016, right? Like for a few days, it looked like that's the end. Like there's no way he can win. It's over. All the reporting on that had the very somber meetings inside the Trump campaign, trying to persuade him to maybe step down. And he just said, screw it. No, I'm not going to, right? And just like now, you have some Democrats thinking, oh my God, like he won the election on that stage that Saturday because of the sort of great display of, whether it's destiny or just kind of like physical bravery in the moment. But I remember there are other moments when, like in 2016, when it seemed that the election was going in one way inevitably and then went another. So I will hazard not a prediction about the impact of the assassination, because who knows that, but I think that the possible exit of Biden from the race will do as much, if not more, to shake up the election than Trump surviving this attempt.
And every one of these is just another data point in Ross's grand united theory. Unified theory.
I have no, that's the thing about sort of weird cosmic moments. I have no unified theory. I'm sort of
it's weird cosmic energy driving this.
Yeah, well sure, but that doesn't tell you anything about what the energy has in mind or where this is going. And I agree with Carlos. I don't think I don't think the election is over by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I think it's over.
Oh, no, it's too weird to be over.
I think it's over if Biden remained the nominee. I do think it's probably over then. But with something, with a different nominee, I don't think it's. I think Trump is the favorite, but I don't think it's absolutely over. And I don't know where any of this is going. I feel like the last couple of weeks have felt tremendously significant without there being sort of clear implications about what the significance will be. But again, it's after midnight, so tomorrow I'll have figured it out.
The debate, I think, felt like more of a turning point to me than the attempt on Trump's life. Weirdly, even though just a terrible debate performance by one candidate seems a lot less consequential. And so, that this is, we've had multiple October surprises and it's still July.
Yeah. And with that is a good moment for me to just call out all those people out there who were complaining that this election was going to be soul crushingly boring and it was just going to be your usual old rematch. Thanks, guys. Thanks. I blame you entirely.
Oh, God. I'm sleepy.
I think it's time to let Carlos go to bed.
We are in danger of competing with the once and possible future president of the United States in increasing incoherence, which makes it a good time to call things off.
Thanks for joining our conversation. Give Matter of Opinion a follow on your favorite podcast app, and leave us a nice review while you're there to let other people know why they should listen. Do you have a question for us based on something we talked about today? We want to hear it. Share it with us in a voicemail by calling 212-556-7440, and we might just respond to it in an upcoming episode. You can also email us at matterofopinion@nytimes.com. Matter of Opinion is produced by Sophia Alvarez-Boyd, Phoebe Lett, and Andrea Betanzos. It's edited by Jordana Hochman. Our fact-check team is Kate Sinclair, Mary Marge Locker, and Michelle Harris. Original music by Isaac Jones, Carol Sabaro, Sonia Herrero, and Pat McCusker. Mixing by Pat McCusker and Carol Sabaro. Audience strategy by Shannon Busta and Christina Samuelewski. Our executive producer is Annie Rose Strasser.